This episode is brought to you by The Fifth Vital Sign. Master your cycles and optimize your fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats on Amazon.com. Listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible. Visit fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. This episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions, and it's available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 279. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Today, I'm sharing another installment of my Fertility Awareness Reality Series. In today's episode, I'm sharing my conversation with my client, Jen, who was a member of my my 4-month one-on-one coaching program. And what's really interesting, and I think what you'll really appreciate about Jen's story, is that in her case, she recently came off of hormonal birth control and her period did not come back right away. When we dived into working together, she was a little bit concerned because she did come off of birth control to start conceiving ultimately within the next several months. And coming off the pill and not having her period return right away was really just the main issue. So when she reached out to me and we started working together, really the goal was, let's get my period back and see if we can get my cycles back on track. And so in today's episode, we kind of share what happened, how long it took for Jen's cycles to start returning, and what this process really looks like. So post-pill, getting your period back, working towards balancing hormones, as well as learning fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy. And so if you've listened to the podcast for a while, we talk a lot about the pill and a lot about the side effects and the impact on fertility and why it's important to take time to improve your fertility and really work towards preparing for pregnancy in a way that is a little bit different to the way our society tells us to do it. But one thing to remember is when you are not on hormonal birth control, it is possible to conceive in any cycle where you ovulate. And so even though there is a statistical trend of reduced fertility for several months post-pill, when you are coming off the pill and you're not wanting to conceive right away, it's really important to have a strategy and a plan in place. If you're learning fertility awareness on the fly, you do have to give yourself some time to really learn the method before you start using it. And so if you are in this situation, if you're thinking about coming off birth control and you're wondering, what is this going to look like? I know that you're really going to appreciate today's episode. If you're looking for support to help you through this journey of transitioning from hormonal birth control to fertility awareness, and really just to get to that place of confidence where you understand how the method works, you understand the rules, you know that you can use it effectively, and really, it's about that choice. As women, I believe that we have the right to choose any type of birth control that we want so that we can prevent pregnancy when we're not ready. But with that said, we also have the right to get pregnant when we want. And that's the piece of the conversation that is often missing. We're so focused on avoiding pregnancy that we forget that we also have a right to get pregnant when we're ready. And in order for that to happen, especially these days, knowing how the pill can suppress fertility temporarily, on average, taking about 9 to 12 cycles for your cycles to return normally and to normalize. And on average, for it taking twice as long to conceive after coming off of a hormonal method, it's really important that we remember that we also have the right to get pregnant when we are ready. And that means that we have the right to the information that we need to optimize our menstrual cycles, to normalize our hormones, and to support our bodies to resume healthy cycling if we're coming off of hormonal birth control. We have the right to take the time that we need in preconception to really optimize our cycles and our health and our fertility so that when we are ready to conceive, not only can our bodies do it, but we're in an optimal state so that we can have healthy pregnancies, healthy babies, and that we can continue to be healthy postpartum, because many of us have delayed pregnancy for quite a while. And so when we have our first pregnancy, we're really wanting to hop into the second pregnancy, in many cases quite soon after. So these steps are all really, really important in order for us to be healthy. Ultimately, if you're wanting to have a baby at some point in the future, it's not just about having a baby. It's also about being a healthy, happy mom and being able to be a parent to your child. So with that said, this is more of a ramble than I intended, but so it goes sometimes. If you're wanting support on your journey, I do invite you to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. If you're listening to this episode in real time, registration is about to close. So if you were waiting for the last minute, it has arrived. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. As I record this, there are still spaces in the program. So if you see the page up with registration available, it means that there is still a spot open for you. If the registration page is not there and there's join the waiting list, then it means that the registration is now full. But as long as that registration page is open, there is still a spot available. We start on October 1st, if you're listening to this in real time, October 1st, 2019, and we would love to have you in there, whether you are actively trying to conceive, whether you are planning to conceive in the future, or whether you have no intention of having babies and you're really wanting to get the birth control aspect of fertility awareness down pat, we have a spot for you. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now, without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Jen. And I'm really excited to be here today with Jen. She is a member of my 4-month coaching program. And I'm just excited to have her here in one of our on-air sessions. So welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you.
As we were talking just in the pre-chat, we actually had one of our group calls last night. So it feels like it's been like a minute since I saw you. But one of the things I really like about doing the on-air sessions is that I get to ask questions that we typically don't necessarily talk about as much in our sessions together, because our sessions tend to be more focused. We're looking at the chart, we're looking at all the specific details. So I'd love to give you an opportunity just to share a little bit about your history. So, when you had your first period, if you've ever used birth control before, what your experience was like managing your fertility to this point, and then basically like what brought you to jump into the 4-month program at this stage of your journey.
Sure. Sounds good. And if I'm talking too much, feel free to interrupt and ask questions because it's a long story. But I did get my first period when I was about 14 years old. I would think I was a freshman in high school. I remember being on vacation. So I'm thinking that maybe I finally had a chance to relax and my body finally decided that I was able to menstruate. And I do remember like some spotting leading up to it and thinking like, oh, is this my period? Is this my period? And then finally having that moment of like, this is what everybody's talking about. So I had my period when I was 14. I had a pretty stressful childhood. My parents got divorced when I was about 8 years old, and it was a pretty ugly divorce. So I think that I was a pretty highly stressed kid, and my menstrual cycle was not at the forefront of my attention, but I do remember having incredibly irregular cycles. I would have a period every like 3 or 4 months. So it's probably like a 60 to 90 day cycle. And I had no idea what was going on with my body. And I did go to the doctor, and the doctor was kind of like, oh, well, you're young, so it's possible that, it will take a couple of years for your cycles to normalize. I did exercise a lot as a child. I was very active. And as a teen, I played tennis, and I did a lot of exercise on my own. And that's continued to be a part of my life. So, that might have had something to do with my very irregular cycle. So the stress and the exercise. I didn't have that many people to talk to about it. Like, other than going to the doctor, I did end up living with my dad, and I did not have a close relationship with my mom. So I kind of had this feeling about my body and my menstrual cycle. Like, I was so confused. I would talk to my friends, and they'd be like sitting out of gym class or not able to go to school sometimes because their periods were so bad. And I didn't understand that. So fast forward probably about 4 years, I'm going to college. Everything sort of stayed as it was. My periods were regular. If I would tell anybody about it, they'd be like, oh, and they'd be like, that's really weird. So I didn't feel like I had the ability to talk about it that much. I did go to college my freshman year, still had no idea what was happening with my body. I noticed that lots of girls were on birth control, and I wasn't at this point. But I came home for Thanksgiving that first semester, and I remember being in the car with my stepmom and my aunt, and they were like asking me about how school is going, and they were basically like, so have you had sex yet? And I was like, well, no, I have this problem. My periods are really irregular. I don't know what's happening with my body. And they were like, well, you should go on birth control. And I was like, oh, well, what will that do? Like, I had no idea, like, that's why all these girls were on birth control, that it would regulate their cycle is what I was told. So I came home for that. After that semester was over, I went to the doctor. They did do a pelvic ultrasound on me and found that there was nothing physically wrong with me. I went to the gynecologist, and I had my first PAP. And I basically asked for birth control because this is what I was told that I should do. And my doctor said, okay. She gave me Yaz, which I remember was like in this like pretty turquoise pack. And she gave me lots of samples, which I've heard a lot of your clients also have the same experience, that we leave with like boxes and boxes of birth control, which it was really expensive at the time. So I was so happy. And I went back to school, and I remember taking a pill to induce a bleed. And then I started on my pack. And then I felt like all the other girls, and I thought, I'm healthy and I'm getting a period as I thought it was. So I continued on, and I was on it for years and years. I graduated from college. And over the years, I started having a better relationship with my mom, who was a nurse, actually. And she would tell me all the time, like, you shouldn't be on birth control. It's so bad for you, synthetic hormones. And, it has all this bad stuff in it. You shouldn't be on it. And I'd be like, yeah, whatever. And I'd keep living my life. My dad also was pretty health conscious, like separately would say to me, you really shouldn't be on that anymore. So I started to wise up, and I started to actually listen to my parents. I did a lot of research on it. And, being a health conscious person, I was like, I don't really want to be on this anymore. I was living with my boyfriend at the time. I was probably 25 or 26, so probably like 4 or 5 years ago. I did decide to go off of it for a little while. I went off of it for a couple of months, and then I went back on it because my boyfriend at the time, now husband, was a little uncomfortable. I still didn't really understand everything that was happening with my body. And fast forward, I got engaged to my now husband and then married. He is a little bit older than me. He's 34. And I knew that he was going to really want a baby soon. And I'm excited to hopefully get pregnant soon at some point. And I talked to him about the birth control pill. And I said, my cycles were really irregular before I went on the pill. So it might take a while for me to get my period back after going off the pill. He was like, oh, it's fine. Stay on it for now. So eventually we got married. Got married last summer in July. It was the end of 2018. I was like, I'm done. We're married now. I'm going off the birth control pill. I had done some research about what could happen to me. I was very nervous, but I was also really excited. So it was one of the last days of 2018. I finished my last pack, and I was like, I'm starting 2019 fresh, off the birth control pill. And so I went off of it, and I wasn't getting my period. It took about 3 months, and I went to the doctor. I had picked a gynecologist or an OBGYN at this point. And she was like, oh, well, like if you, it had been 3 months, and she thought maybe I had PCOS or it was post-pill amenorrhea that I was experiencing. And she didn't really know. And I was referred to a reproductive endocrinologist, and I went there, and the doctor, I didn't trust him from the beginning. He was already talking about IVF and IUI and, oh, we can do this and you can be pregnant so soon. And while I was really excited because this would help and I wanted to get pregnant soon and start my family, from the beginning, I was just not into it. But I gave it a couple visits. I did tell the doctor, I was like, I do want to recover my cycles. I made that very clear. And he was like, oh, well, I'll just put you on birth control and we'll recover your cycle. And I was like, no, I don't want to go on that again. I kept with it for a while. I was just like, he didn't really say that. I must be imagining. So we decided the least invasive thing to do would be to go on letrozole, which is a fertility drug. So I went on 2.5 milligrams of letrozole for 5 days, and then we would have timed sex. And then I'd go to the fertility clinic and they'd give me a blood test and a sonogram, and I'd speak to a nurse. So the first time, my follicles didn't grow. The second time I went and had timed intercourse, went back again, and the follicles had disappeared. So they were like, well, either they died or they could have dropped. And I was like, okay, I don't know what's happening. But then they told me you should go on double the amount of letrozole. And I didn't mention this, but the letrozole made me feel awful. I never had problems with like my period and going to work, but the letrozole, I had hot flashes, I had headaches, I had pain. It was just terrible. And I did have a hard time going to work. So, and I also was like, well, I could be pregnant and you're telling me to go back on the letrozole. That could be dangerous if I were to be pregnant. Nobody was calling me back to answer my questions. So that was sort of my breaking point where I was like, I'm done with the fertility drugs. I'm done with the timed intercourse. It was really stressful for both of us. I'd say like it was really hard on me and my relationship and my mental health. I just felt like, like a lab rat basically. So I was like, I'm done with this. I'm not taking the drugs. It was the weekend. I'm not taking the drugs. I'm just going to go on living my life and I'll figure something out. The doctor called me on Monday because I left some angry emails. Nobody's answering my questions. Nobody's calling me. I don't know what to do. And he said, okay, Jennifer, it will be fine. You just need to take more letrozole and it'll grow your follicles. And this is nothing to worry about. And to which I said, I'm done taking the drugs. I don't want to take this anymore. And he was like, well, Jennifer, you're not going to ovulate if you don't take the drugs. To which I was like, challenge accepted. I am not taking the drugs. I will figure this out. I think that day I went home and I was doing research, and that's how I found you, Lisa. Started working with you, and it's been wonderful so far. I recently, within the past couple of weeks, ovulated and had my first period a couple days ago. So it was 6 months later after going off the pill with some lifestyle changes and charting and marking my fertile signs, and it really worked out. So I'm obviously really happy that I chose to do the program and started working with Lisa. It was really great.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. You really took us through. I always find it interesting as an interviewer that we can have a window into like 15 years of your life within just a couple of minutes. And anyone who listens to the podcast knows that I usually take a minute after, because it's so easy to just kind of skirt over it all. Yeah. But you had a really just an interesting experience over the years where from the very beginning when you had your periods, they were consistently, not consistent, for lack of a better way to say it, consistent, not consistent. And then also kind of a series of medical professionals kind of, it's not a big deal, it's nothing to worry about. The pill's the solution for everything, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like the going party line. And even just the sense of now that you were more aware before you went off of the pill, having those conversations about, okay, I know that my periods were irregular. I'm not sure what's going to happen when I come off of it. Having the awareness that it could take a little bit more time for your period to come back, but also still falling into it's just really interesting to hear. It's just such a different modality. So for instance, with me, obviously, the cycle is the center of what we do. And the goal is healthy cycles because it's a sign of overall health. And when your cycles are when you're not ovulating regularly, you're not having a period, we know that it's a sign that we have to kind of look at some things and make changes and those types of things. But it's just really interesting hearing you describe kind of like option B, which is like, we'll just make you ovulate with letrozole. Letrozole is in the group of, it's a drug that makes your cells not resistant to estrogen. So it changes how your cells respond to estrogen. So it doesn't cause every woman to ovulate. Obviously, there's always a percentage of women for whom they don't ovulate either that particular occasion or at all. But obviously, by making the cells desensitized to estrogen causes your body to like make more. And for some women, that would help to trigger ovulation. So yeah, so that's a lot to unpack. I remember when we first started working together, obviously your main concern was that you hadn't been off the pill for a little while, you hadn't ovulated yet, and you hadn't had a cycle. And we were left to kind of sort through what you had experienced and try to figure out, is this an issue? Like, is the, you had a practitioner that said, is this PCOS? And then also, like, could this be related to the other lifestyle pieces? So maybe before we jump into our session, because your experience is really interesting, because you jumped right in and made several, different changes, but maybe you could share some of the changes that you made and kind of why you made them and how you just in your experience feel like that contributed to your period coming back.
Sure. Yeah. The one bit of information that I had before working with you that my OBGYN shared with me is she was like, you probably should lay off the exercise a little bit. I did mention that I did do a lot of exercise in my adult life. I did even more exercise. So I was exercising a lot. And
can you just share with us like what that means? Like, break it down for us in a week, a typical week.
Sure. I would probably do like some sort of workout class, like a bar class or a Pilates class, followed by like a cycling class on my Peloton bike that I have right next to me. So it would be, almost 2 hours of exercise a day, most days. And I was doing stretching and a lot of foam roller and things like that. But as you mentioned to me, there wasn't much time for recovery in my busy workout schedule. So from like the 3-month mark after coming off the pill, so back at the end of March, I stopped doing all cardio exercise. So like no running or cycling or HIIT exercises or anything like that. And I would just do low impact stretching, yoga, some Pilates, bar, things like that. So in the beginning, I barely did anything because I was so worried, and I sort of started adding it back in. So that's sort of the exercise component. And now I do several exercises a week, but it's all low impact still. And I do go on walks. I went on a really long walk yesterday, and that's sort of like, it gives me a little bit of cardio that I need, but it's just very gentle and easy. And then other changes I made a lot of changes in my diet after starting to work with you. I started adding in more fats and more protein. And I try to add some sort of animal protein to every meal, and especially right in the morning, because that's the first thing we talked about was tackling breakfast. So I typically will have bone broth every day, first thing. And what I like to have for breakfast is whole milk yogurt with some seeds and fruit, low glycemic fruit like berries. I also added in some seeds to help with, like, I wanted to try seed cycling as well. So I've been using pumpkin seeds and flax seeds. And then in the post-ovulatory phase, I use the sunflower and the sesame seeds. I don't know if that's helped, but I added that in and I like the taste of the seeds. So might as well. Yeah. And just, I think prior to working with you, I had several months where I didn't eat as much animal protein, and I was sort of working just on having vegetables. And when I was having protein, I was having more plant-based protein. I don't, like, after reflecting on it a little bit, I wasn't feeling like it was best for my digestion or my body. I had like a little bit lower energy. I don't think it was best for my digestion. I'll leave it there. So adding more animal protein and definitely made me feel more energetic and more lively, and things got better, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you made a lot of changes. It just, in your case, it's one of those things with the menstrual cycle, when you're able to kind of, do your investigation and kind of identify what is most likely contributing to whatever you're experiencing. What I always say is, like, when you kind of hit the nail on the head, you typically see some sort of response or change. Mm-hmm. So it can be very helpful tracking the cycle throughout your life or throughout specific periods of time, because you do get the feedback and you kind of know that if you don't see the shift that you're looking for, then you've likely still have to kind of do some more investigation to figure out what it is. But I mean, at the stage that we're at in our work together, so now that you've had your first full cycle, which we were celebrating quite a bit,
Yeah.
it's you're in the stage of avoiding pregnancy until you're ready to start trying. So we're kind of getting the method down, getting the rules down, getting used to what to do with all the mucus you're seeing and how to chart it and all of that. So as we kind of shift into the, session part of our on-air session, maybe let me know what's kind of at the top of your mind, or, what, if any, topics you want to make sure that we focus on today.
Sure. I guess I've been thinking a lot about the post-pill, post-birth control syndrome. And since I'm now nearing the 6-month mark of being off the birth control pill, I've heard that around 6 months, you might get some interesting symptoms like hair in the wrong places, or your hair might be falling out, or you might get acne. And so far, I've been pretty lucky with that. But I was just wondering your take on if I might experience any of those symptoms. I have done a lot of things to sort of help support my body with supplements, and I also do acupuncture once a week. So I don't know if that's something that I should be thinking about, and just because we haven't really talked about that too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, different practitioners talk about this in different ways. I think one of my very first episodes, I interviewed Laura Schoenfeld. So it's almost like 5 years ago. And because she had written this great article on Chris Kresser's website about post-birth control syndrome. So this has been something, practitioners have been talking about for a really long time. So typically, I don't necessarily use the same language. I don't necessarily always refer to it as post-birth control syndrome, because when you're looking at the chart, the way I see it visually and the way that women often experience it in their menstrual cycles is that there's just this there's a phase of transition that your body goes through when you're coming off the pill. Mm-hmm. And so, from a physical perspective, one of the most jarring things that I found when I was doing the research for the fifth vital sign was that the pill shrinks the ovaries. So there's actually a physical shift that happens. And it makes sense if you think about it in terms of what's happening in the cycle. So when you're on the pill suppresses ovulation in most cases. So sometimes completely, sometimes partially, but ultimately ovulation is suppressed for the most part. Especially when you're taking like combined oral contraceptives. So you mentioned that you were taking Yaz, that falls into that category. What happens is like you're setting your ovaries to sleep. They kind of just aren't doing anything. So in many respects, it kind of makes sense that there would be a change in the actual physical ovary, because it's kind of just hanging out, waiting to have an opportunity to do stuff again. Mm-hmm. So the research whenever I share that, I often get a lot of like freaked out women that are just like, oh my gosh, it's doing thing to my body. Is it permanent? So there's nothing in the research to suggest that these effects are permanent. But if you think about how that could have an impact on your hormone cycle, there's a couple of different research studies. And I always say, like, if you're looking at the research, you often have to look where the money is. So these were studies where they were looking at women who were seeking fertility preservation. So these are women who were on the pill, but they wanted to freeze their eggs. Mm-hmm. For the future. So they would come off the pill, and if they did the stimulation right immediately post-pill, it wouldn't produce very many eggs. But if they waited 6 to 7 months, it would then produce better eggs, or more. I should say better, but more. So then what the studies show is that the ovarian reserve parameters, so the same things that if you were going to a fertility specialist, they're going to check for your anti-Müllerian hormone, they're going to look for levels, they're going to look for your antral follicle count, they may look at your ovarian volume, so they're going to check all these things. Post-pill, it takes a minimum of 6 to 7 months before those ovarian reserve parameters fall back into normal. So then what you mentioned about like the 6-month mark and, how the hormones are changing. Well, when you also look at what's happening in the menstrual cycle, on average, it takes anywhere from 9 to 12 cycles for the cycles to go completely back to normal. So even if women have their first period straight away, typically it's going to take anywhere from 12 months to even a year and a half before the cycles are totally normal again. Like in all respects, looking at it from a fertility awareness educator perspective, where we're looking at how many days of mucus do you have? When are you ovulating in the cycle? How long is your luteal phase? Like, what is the average length of your cycle? So when you look at all of those things. So with those two pieces of information combined, then you can appreciate that it's just going to take a little bit of time for your hormones to totally normalize, for your estrogen levels to be where they're going to be, for your progesterone, because those hormones are produced by your ovaries. Mm-hmm. So your ovaries aren't even up to full capacity for the first 6 to 7 months post-pill. So when you have women that are having, like, it's all fine, right? They come off and it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I was so scared I was going to get acne right away. But some women develop it later because their hormones are finally waking up. Their ovaries are like,
right.
boom, acne. So in terms of your question of like what you can do, one of the things that you can be very comfortable in is knowing that you, first of all, have done a lot. Like, so Jen, you've done a lot. Like you've really, you've done lots of things to make sure that your diet is really, really healthy. You're doing all kinds of things to ensure that you're kind of supporting your body and your hormones. We've talked about all the important kind of practical things like sleep. Obviously, you talked a little bit about exercise, and you've made some modifications, ensuring you're getting enough to eat and ensuring that you're eating in a way that isn't necessarily like triggering your blood sugar all the time. So you're kind of maintaining. So first and foremost, you're doing a lot, because I think a lot of women underestimate the value of focusing on those basics, like getting enough to eat, getting good sleep, moderate exercise, all that kind of stuff. And some of the specific things that you can do post-pill to minimize the chances of, say, acne would also include addressing the nutrient depletion specifically.
Mm-hmm.
The pill specifically is known to deplete B vitamins, particularly B12, B6, and folate. The pill is associated with depleting zinc and selenium and coenzyme Q10 and magnesium. It depresses thyroid function. It has been shown to alter your gut flora. So, and then I think have I hit it all? Trying to think if there's more. And it's so ironic. I always say it's so ironic with the coenzyme Q10 aspect of it, because any woman who's trying to conceive and looking at how she can improve egg quality immediately understands that coenzyme Q10 has been shown to play an important role in reducing the susceptibility of the egg to oxidative stress and things like that. So it's kind of ironic that the pill is depleting this exact nutrients that you need for optimal fertility. So, So in terms of acne, if you're really depleted in zinc, many women find that if they address that post-pill and they ensure that they're eating enough zinc-rich foods or supplementing if necessary, working with their practitioners, then that can dramatically improve the situation, as well as attending to any issues with gut dysbiosis and supporting gut health, things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's a mouthful.
Well, luckily I am supplementing a lot, and all the things that you mentioned, I am supplementing with. So I'm hoping that addresses any nutrients that I was depleted of while on the pill.
Well, and I know some women, I'm not sure if you fell into this category, but it's interesting to me. I've had many conversations with women at various stages of their journey. So some women are still on the pill or whatever type of hormonal birth control and are really pretty terrified, frankly, of coming off of it. In my first interview with Holly Grigg-Spall, I think it was episode 21, it was really interesting because she talked about that, like the active fear of coming off of it for a variety of reasons, not just the fear of getting pregnant before you're ready, but also the fear of what's going to happen. This thing has been kind of stabilizing my emotions. Like, what's going to happen to me emotionally when I come off of this? Am I going to, is there going to be anything weird? So for women who are listening, who are in that stage of they're not even off of it yet, but they're scared that they're going to come off of it, especially after hearing it's a pretty terrifying post-birth control syndrome, right? It's a pretty scary kind of title to think that this horrible thing is waiting for you after you come off of the pill. So if you're still on the pill, implementing the exact things that we just talked about is helpful. Ensuring that you're good multivitamin, hormone supporting foods, that you're getting enough fat, that you're sleeping, that you're kind of doing all those things. You can even start that before you are actually emotionally ready to come off, but you're already off. But I'm just sharing that for
everybody. Yeah.
For everybody. Yeah. But so tell me now, so you've had your first period. We're kind of at the beginning stages of charting.
Mm-hmm.
You've been very consistent and specific with your charting. So looking at your mucus, looking at your cervical position, your temperatures. So tell me just in general how you feel at this stage now that you've had your first ovulation and period going into charting, particularly in this kind of window prior to when you're ready to try, because that would mean that you're avoiding at this point.
Right. I am avoiding because I did learn I do want my body to sort of be ready for pregnancy, as we just spoke about, that I can be anybody that's taking the pill is very depleted of the nutrients that you need. And so I really just want to make sure my body is ready. When I came off the pill, or when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, I'll just try right away. Apparently, as soon as you get off, you can get pregnant really quickly. So I've sort of decided now, so sort of backpedal a little bit to learn the charting and to have a couple of cycles to make sure that, I know what's happening and my body sort of has time to normalize and get better. But yeah, at this point, I really don't know how long the pre-ovulatory phase will be, because when I first started charting, it was about my whole cycle was about 36 days. And so now I'm hoping it'll be a little bit shorter. I'm on day 9 or day 10 right now? Day 10. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident. I did have some confusion with thinking that I was having peak mucus when it was actually probably just a dampness or vaginal cell slough. But this cycle, I think I'm a little bit more aware of the difference, but that was something that I was a little confused about. And I know that we'd spoken about cervical health, that sometimes when you have a wetness on your dry days, that might be something to be aware of, that it could be a sign of abnormal cells. And so I did get on some additional supplements that would sort of help support that and try to make that better.
I just wanted to pop in the midst of my conversation with Jen to remind you that registration is now open for Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my live 10-week group coaching program designed specifically to help you master fertility awareness charting wherever you are on your fertility awareness journey. Whether you are still on the pill right now and wanting to come off of it and wanting some support right off the bat so that you can really jump into charting your cycles with the confidence that you can prevent pregnancy until you are ready to start your family, whether you are not planning to have babies at all and you want this to be your primary method of birth control. If you want a hormone-free method that you can trust and you really want to learn from professionals so that you can really shortcut that learning curve and understand what you're doing right away so that you can, feel confident that this method will work for you, or whether you're actively trying to conceive or planning to conceive shortly in the future, we have a spot for you. As if you're listening to this episode in real time, we are starting on October 1st. So if you were waiting till the last minute has arrived. Welcome. And as I'm recording this, there are still spots open. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and register today. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump back into my conversation with Jen.
Well, yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I recommend is that prior to actually going ahead and using fertility awareness, so prior to having unprotected sex on your infertile days, I do recommend going through one full cycle of charting. And I think you can appreciate why that would make sense. So we've been working together for a couple of months now. And so, I mean, during that time, even though you hadn't started to approach ovulation, so that took a little bit of time, you were still getting the hang of the routine and checking and all that. But what happens when you go through the full cycle and you're able to see period, approaching ovulation, right, and then the luteal phase, and then the following cycle, is that there's certain things that you kind of need to experience. It's kind of like you should have been there. Like when someone tells you something about a vacation, like they try to describe something and you don't get the joke because you weren't there. So with charting, there's various kind of stages. So the first stage is like the head knowledge, like reading about it and learning about it, the textbook, the pictures. But it's a completely different thing to know it in your bones because you've experienced it.
Totally.
The first chart is what I often refer to as kind of like a learning chart. And so you'll kind of see that for yourself. A big part of it is getting comfortable confirming ovulation with all of the signs. Then once you do that, my recommendation is to kind of move to the post-ovulatory phase first. So it's like stages. Like you want to first get the information down, and then you want to get the post-ovulatory phase down. And only when you're comfortable in those two areas is what I recommend I don't even necessarily recommend. I think every woman all of my clients are adults, so I'm not going to tell you what to do or what not to do. I'm going to make recommendations, but ultimately, for many of my clients, they're going to be the ones to tell me when they're ready to kind of take that next step. And I think it's helpful just to think about it that way as well. It takes some of the pressure off, and it also, I think it's helpful with the fertility awareness method. Like, it's not the same thing as taking a pill. Like, when you take the pill or when you get an IUD, like, you just have birth control like that day. Maybe you have to wait a week or, but you know what I'm saying. But there's no real period. But with fertility awareness, because it's a practice, it's something that you're doing, that it's not this instant thing. It does take a little bit of time, especially if you want to be successful. I know it wouldn't be the end of the world if you were to get pregnant, but I also have the sense from you that you are quite serious about taking a couple cycles.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, so we talked a little bit about managing the fertile window. So, I mean, up to this point, I'm sure you've had to kind of manage your fertile window. Did you want to speak to that at all, and like how you have been, or how you kind of anticipate to manage the fertile window until you're ready to start trying?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been a little hesitant just because I'm not totally sure what's happening. And I know the listeners can't see my chart, but I did have a day of peak mucus 2 days ago in my pre-ovulatory phase. Like, I guess it was like 3 days off of my period. Yeah, as you just mentioned, I am a little hesitant, and I've sort of just been abstaining at this point, still trying to figure everything out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, that's good, and it's also normal.
Yeah.
So what I found is that when I'm working with women, I mean, every woman is different, has different experiences, different levels of comfort, different place on the spectrum. So I often talk about the spectrum of like 0, no babies, 10 babies. It can change at any time, but at any given point in time, we're somewhere on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important, though, especially when you're in this stage before you've actively started to use the method, to start thinking about so when you're using fertility awareness, there's basically times that you can have unprotected sex and there's times that you can't. And so you have to, it's a method that forces communication between two people. Because in one of my previous episodes where I was talking about that, like, it was like the controversial one about like, should men be held responsible for birth control? And I said, like, no man has ever ejaculated inside of me unless it was explicitly planned. That's kind of what it is when you're using fertility awareness. Like, it has to be explicitly planned. So part of that is having those conversations and like deciding what it's going to look like for you, because every couple is different. Every person is different. Everybody has preferences, what they're comfortable with, what they're not, what they like, what they don't. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if you've had that type of conversation yet with your partner, or if you kind of have a sense, but just let me know your thoughts on that. Like, is that something that you've kind of thought about or had a conversation about?
Yeah, we've definitely talked about it. I think in my situation, the more I talk about it, the less enticing it is. So still trying to, like, it's a transition, coming off the pill, it didn't have to be a conversation, or when I was on the pill, it didn't have to be a conversation. It was just sort of like, it is what it is, and you don't have to worry about it. So I think finding the right balance. And I remember you talking about having these conversations in another podcast episode and like creative ways of sort of communicating. So I think, I might be up for trying something like that to communicate today is a good day or today is not a good day, fertile, and communicating that, because sometimes I feel like the more it's discussed, the less enticing it is.
Well, I mean, that's an important and very valid point, because everybody's partner is different. So some of my clients, their partners are like passing the thermometer in the morning and like writing their temperatures in their charts.
Right.
Most that's not the case in most relationships that I've seen. So it really depends. I think first and foremost, again, it's a conversation either you need to have with yourself or you and your partner, but you kind of have to know your partner, know what you're dealing with, and know to what extent that in this case, he wants to, like, how involved does he want to be? Mm-hmm. If you're okay with whatever extent that he wants to be involved, then fine. Because there's no rule that says he has to be super involved and he has to know every detail. Because not all couples who use this method, their partners don't necessarily know every detail, and it's not necessary technically for you to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some women are uncomfortable with that because it does then put the pressure on her to know everything and to get it all right. And she's the one that has to tell him. And then if there was ever a mistake made, then it's her fault, right? So that's why it's important to have these conversations with yourself and your partner so that you can kind of figure out, like, if you do want your partner to take some responsibility or play a role, what role do you want? Like, what would that look like? What would make you comfortable?
Okay.
So that's kind of like the first step.
Yeah.
And then the second step is then kind of figuring out what it's going to look like. So it is important to have a strategy and plan in place. It doesn't have to be in like written, but you have to kind of know. So on the days that I'm fertile, the days that we cannot have unprotected sex unless we're going to get pregnant, what exactly is it that you're going to do?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a menu. So, restaurant, LSX. There's a menu of all the things you could do. And I know I'm full of all the silly puns. I can't help myself. But there's a menu. And so what are you going to choose off the menu? So some couples, it's straight abstinence, like don't touch me, don't look at me. I don't know. For some couples, it is not penetrative sex. So no penis and vagina, but we can do all the fun and no penis and vagina.
Mm-hmm.
For some couples, it's condoms. They like condoms. Condoms are great. Condoms work fine. Everybody's happy with condoms. For some couples, it's withdrawal. And again, I'm not promoting or denying. I'm just listing all the options. But for some couples, it's withdrawal because maybe they don't like condoms. For some couples, it's a cervical cap or diaphragm used correctly with spermicide, like a non-toxic spermicide. For some couples, it's a combo. So they'll use a condom and withdraw. For some, they'll use a diaphragm and or cervical cap and withdraw. And condom. So you have like the menu options, and then you kind of have to decide what that's going to look like for you and how kind of both of you can be happy and content as you can be with that choice.
Right.
One of the things that you mentioned, it was like the more I talk about, the less appealing it is. So sometimes it's about how you present it. Sometimes it's about the presentation.
Yeah.
And focusing on the benefits kind of thing. So some of the benefits just off the top of my head about not being on birth control would be that you get to keep your libido and enjoy your sex drive. And many women find that, after coming out, I'm not sure if this was the case for you, but I know many women find that after coming off the pill, they do want it more and they do feel their sex drive coming back and potentially have more lubrication down there. Some women experience vaginal dryness on the pill. And so when they come off and their hormones have stabilized and they're kind of past that 6-month mark and et cetera, they feel like, oh, this is great. It feels more comfortable, that type of thing. So bonus.
Exactly.
For some of the other kind of benefits then is that once you get into the groove and you are comfortable with charting, then you can have unprotected sex at certain times of the cycle and feel comfortable and confident that you won't get pregnant.
Right.
So that's also a benefit of something to look forward to. Like we're at the stage of my cycle where we can go unprotected, right? So that's something to kind of think about, like, what would be his incentive to care about this?
Yeah.
What's in it for him, right? I'm sure there's more benefits, but those were the two that came.
Yeah.
I don't know. So tell me your thoughts on that and if that helps, and also just in general, because it's a different thing. I think it would be harder. I've never had the experience of going from a hormonal contraceptive method to going to fertility awareness in a relationship. I've never had to renegotiate.
Right.
I've only ever had to negotiate. So we negotiated the first time because it's like, hey, you want to knock me up today? Because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I don't really mince words, so I say stuff like that to people. Yeah, maybe today's the day. Right? But I've never had to renegotiate. So that's a different type of conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think something as simple as like a red dot or a green dot, like something like that, because like I said, the conversation is not enticing, but not that it has to be a discussion every day. It could just be like a sign, and we can start that way. Mm-hmm. Something like that might work.
Yeah, I mean, my brain goes in all different directions, like wear a certain color of underwear, like but again, it could be as simple as like, I know one of my or a couple of my clients actually they put the chart, like, but this is, again, depends on how involved the partner wants to be. So some of my clients had the chart up somewhere visual, whether it's on the nightstand or actually up in the closet or something. And so the partner would kind of know, like, so with like the mucus are certain color on the dots or whatever. So they'll know, like, but yeah, I think that just you'll come up with what feels like you already have a sense of like what's going to work in your relationship.
Yeah.
And then the thing is, at first, of course, it feels weird because it's different. But once you get into the groove and you've been through a couple of cycles, I mean, by that time, you'll likely be ready to start trying. So this will only be like a short stint.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like once you kind of go through a couple cycles, and again, you kind of share do the cost benefit analysis, right? Like share the what's in it for him type of stuff. Typically, then it's a bit easier. Mm-hmm. And another benefit that you may not be thinking of is that by taking some time to chart before you actually jump in and conceive, you'll have the experience of charting, because it did take a couple of months of us working together before you did have your first ovulation and period. You have the experience of charting with kind of like an undetermined, like, when is this ovulation thing going to happen? That's going to be very helpful postpartum. Mm-hmm. If you're still in the state of wanting to use fertility awareness and feeling comfortable, because postpartum charting is basically like the longest pre-ovulatory phase.
Right. Isn't like, it could be like 54 days or something that you're infertile?
Oh, it could be 8 months.
Right.
But I mean, it could be.
I read something in the manual, maybe it said something like 50 something days you're infertile, like technically. Yeah. I guess it could extend from there.
So that's like the lactation amenorrhea method, where if you are fully ecologically breastfeeding, so if the baby is only suckling from you, there's lots of skin-to-skin contact. So, and this isn't about judgment. This is just literally about the method. So the more skin-to-skin contact, the more the baby drinks your milk, the more the hormones are released that suppress ovulation. So the more oxytocin and prolactin and all of those things that contribute to the fact that you don't, like, so it's like a natural way to stop you from ovulating for a period of time. So when you follow all of those rules, like according to that, in the book, it's saying that the first 54 days you can consider infertile. So as an educator, you already know, Jen, that for me, I'm thinking and sharing and teaching that if you are in the postpartum and you're wanting to use fertility awareness, it's important for you to chart your cervical mucus. In addition, so I wouldn't, even for myself, I mean, even in the case of I was ecologically breastfeeding and all that, I'm still checking for mucus every day. Mm-hmm. Even if it takes months, I'm still going to check every day, because you never know, right? Because it's yeah. But yes, so that's where you read that, and that's what that's related to. And so basically it's kind of based on some data that shows that women who are totally breastfeeding in that way that I described, the earliest kind of recorded ovulation, kind of based on that. So it's a little rhythmy, but we know that traditional cultures used breastfeeding as a way of natural child spacing. So there is some validity, but any midwife, doctor, fertility awareness educator will advise you that breastfeeding is not birth control. Mm-hmm. So if you want to use an actual, you don't want to rely on breastfeeding as your birth control. You can have that understanding of generally, but you want to still chart.
Of course. Okay.
Yeah. The postpartum, it's just basically mucus, because the temperature is not going to help you until after you've ovulated.
Okay.
Yeah. But you've had experience doing that, which is nice.
Yeah.
We've talked about a few different things. As we kind of move towards wrapping up today, were there any other questions or topics that you wanted to talk about today?
I do. I was talking about this with my mom yesterday. We haven't talked about this, but I do have the MTHFR gene mutation, and she does too. I don't really understand what that means, other than I should be consuming folate instead of folic acid, which I am and have been for 6 months. But is there anything else I should know about it? Is there anything that has to do with like nutrient deficiencies or anything like that I should watch out for?
Well, I mean, it is a complex area. So by no means am I an MTHFR expert. Mm. The interview that I did with Diane Ketty that you've probably already listened to is episode 54, I think it is, highly informative. And of course, Dr. Ben Lynch has some great materials. He just came out with his book, Dirty Genes, several months ago, or even longer than that. It's been out for a little while. So there's lots of great resources. And I think for like very specific, because when you're looking at genes, I mean, it's not just the MTHFR, it can be related to other genes that can have an impact on your methylation. And so it's not necessarily only about folate. So just in that sense. So there's more to the conversation. But in terms of the practical, like what you can do today, it's important to be aware of your potential sources of folic acid, because not only does it mean that you have to like look for the methylated folate on the vitamin, but it also means that if you ingest a kind of an excessive or just like a regular amount of folic acid, then that can interfere. That can cause additional problems. So one of the things just in general, one of the kind of recommendations is kind of look at all of the wheat products and consider avoiding it, not because of the wheat, but because it's in Canada, it's the law that all wheat has to be fortified with vitamins, including folic acid.
Okay.
So, and then in the States, they have labeling laws, but again, bread, but also everything that's made with bread, which basically means everything. So it doesn't necessarily mean like never eat any of it, but it means that know that it depends on, again, if you're homozygous, heterozygous, it depends on if the gene is activated or not. It's very complicated, but just in the general sense, just to be aware that folic acid intake, and that would be like all of the different places that it could be in, fortified foods and things like that, can make things worse.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because I did have a food allergy test back in December, right before I went off the pill. I was briefly working with a naturopath, and I did find out I had an allergy to gluten. So I have been off gluten for a while, and I do feel a lot better. So that is interesting.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because it could be the wheat. It could be the wheat germ agglutinin, like back in my episode with Dr. William Davis. It could be like all of those things, but it could also be like wheat is heavily, heavily sprayed with pesticide if it's not organic. And then also there's the issue with the MTHFR. Yeah, so that's something. And then just in the general sense, I think that it's just something to consider that right now we have this movement and this education going around about these genes, making people feel like there's something wrong with me. I have a gene mutation, and that means. But there would have been a time when it didn't matter if you had the gene or not, because our ancestors would have just eaten food. There would have been no folic acid. Folic acid doesn't exist in nature. It's not found in vegetables or animal products. It's found in fortified foods. We make folic acid.
Right.
There would have been a time when our ancestors would have just eaten food. They would have eaten their greens. They would have eaten their liver. So liver is one of the highest natural sources of folate, choline, and all the nutrients that you need for neural tube development and, all those types of things. So there would have been a time when whether you had the gene or not, it wouldn't have really mattered much. But now a lot of people see these very negative impacts because they're getting so much folic acid from all the fortified foods, and they're not actually getting any folate because they're getting very limited amount from their foods, and not any from their supplements if they're not specifically looking for the methylated version. So again, like there's lots to it, but this is kind of like, what can I do in general? Where can I start? It's just remember the food sources, and we've talked about that a lot. So incorporate those as much as you can. Ensure that you're doing exactly what you're doing, which is sourcing a specific prenatal and or folate that is methylated. And then if you do have additional concerns, or if you have health issues that you're not able to, like they're just not getting better, then at that point it's a good idea to go to somebody who specializes in the MTHFR gene mutation, who can do additional testing to find out if this methylation issue is affecting other areas of your life.
Got it. Okay. It's a good place to start.
Yeah. Great question. As usual, we always have great sessions, Jen.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you sharing your experience with us. And I know it's, as you know, even because you've listened to the podcast, it's really helpful. That's why I love doing these episodes, because it gives a window into what's really happening into women's lives, as opposed to all the stuff that we're told by.
Yes, I enjoy them a lot too. So that's why I wanted to do one.
I'm so glad to have you. And so usually just wrap up with a couple of questions just for the audience, especially we talked a bit about the pill and your experience with it. So, there's women listening right now who are listening to this episode because they're thinking about coming off the pill, or they've been kind of contemplating, like, does this fertility awareness thing really work? So for a woman who's in that stage, what advice, if any, would you give to her?
Yeah, I would say go with your gut. If you feel like you shouldn't be on the pill anymore, then go off of it. And obviously that's sometimes a conversation with your partner, but if you feel really strongly, your partner will respect that, just like mine did. And fertility awareness, it is a process, as we've discussed, but it's really fascinating to be able to see all of these signs and to know what's happening with your body. And for so long I didn't. And so I feel really in control. I feel really knowledgeable. And it's information to share with other women because so few people really know about it. And so I've been talking to people and people are like, wow, like, I don't know anything about that. Maybe I should learn more about it. Let's talk about it. So yeah, I like the idea of our group calls that we have in the program and forming a community around it because it is so niche and I think more people need to know. And yeah, fertility awareness, it's become a routine, as you said. Like I've been diligent in charting because I've been very excited to see, change, and change did happen. You just have to be patient.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome. And then if someone's thinking about joining a program, if they're kind of like, well, she took this, so you took the 4-month Get Pregnant Naturally program. Mm-hmm. And so, other women join the group program, but what would you want them to know if they're kind of on the fence and they're like, is it worth it? Is this something that's going to help me? Those types of the questions that you had before you jumped in.
Totally. Yeah. I was a little skeptical at first, and my husband was skeptical. It is an investment, but the amount that I've learned and what I've been able to do naturally and hopefully be able to get pregnant soon is priceless in my opinion. And I'm so happy to not have to go to the fertility clinic every Saturday in the morning and, for hours and hours. I mean, that's just like one part of the reason I hated it, but to be able to be in control of your body, to know what's happening, it's an amazing experience and it was truly life-changing. So thank you.
Thank you for saying, what came to my mind though, when you were saying that, when you said like, your doctor was like, you'll never ovulate on your own unless I honestly, I think I blocked it out. Like I couldn't fully process it until now.
Yeah, it was terrible.
What came to me. Because when I heard that, I'm like, that's not true. I mean, when a woman isn't ovulating, it's like there's something there and we have to figure out what it is. And if we can support her, then her body can do this.
Absolutely.
So, anyways, so that, for whatever reason, that came up for me and I had to say it because when you were like, I'm going to show you or whatever you said, guess what, dude? I ovulated.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
But thank you so much for being here, Jen. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/279. I just want to send a special shout out to Jen. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience. It was such a treat to have you on the show. And one of the things, especially about today's episode, is that I know it'll resonate with a lot of women. One of the most common questions and comments that I get from women, especially women who've just discovered the podcast and are kind of sorting all of this information out, trying to figure out how to kind of deal with the massive download of information for, any of you who've just started listening to the podcast and this is all new for you. There's all of these mixed feelings about, oh my goodness, I've never been taught this information about my cycle. I've been on the pill for so many years and now I'm curious to know what my cycles are like. And maybe you're planning to conceive within the next few years and you're wanting to sort this all out. Or maybe you went on the pill for different health concerns, or your cycles were irregular, or you had painful periods. And now you're concerned about wanting to address some of these issues without the pill. And so whatever the reasoning is, it can be quite overwhelming. And one of the common threads for women who find themselves in this situation is that kind of common thread of terror. Like, am I going to get pregnant as soon as I come off the pill? How can I transition to this method? When you're on the pill, it's basically taken care of. The birth control box is checked and you don't really have to worry about it. Coming off the pill brings up a lot of anxiety and fear, and often questioning yourself and your ability to follow through with this new charting method and kind of that unknown. Like, like, does it really work? Will I just get pregnant off a whim? And so I think today's episode with Jen is really helpful because it does shed some light on how it can look when you're coming off of hormonal birth control. What's interesting in Jen's case is that her cycles were never really regular. And so coming off of the pill, it was still addressing some of those issues that had been there from the start. And so what I always say is that if you know that you were put on the pill because you stopped having periods, or because you never knew when your period was coming, or because you did have some sort of cycle irregularity that wasn't kind of resolving on its own, then you're at a greater risk to have a situation where you come off the pill and it takes a longer time for your period to come back, because ultimately the pill doesn't fix or cure or solve any of those problems. It just masks your cycle, replaces it with a fake chemical cycle to give you the impression that you're having a regular cycle every month by giving you a withdrawal bleed, but it doesn't actually fix anything. So if you're in that situation as well, it can also be terrifying because you just don't know. You could come off the pill and start cycling right away and everything could be fine, or you could come off the pill and be in a similar situation to Jen where you're not really sure how long it's going to take for your cycles to come back. And you find yourself making, various modifications, dietary, lifestyle, depending on the specific situation to really figure that out. So no matter where you are on your fertility awareness journey, whether you are just considering coming off the pill or just come off the pill, and you're wanting some support to normalize your hormones in a natural way, I want to personally invite you to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. We are starting next week. We're starting right away. And so this is the last call. We would love to have you in the group. As I mentioned at the top of the call, if the registration page is still open when you head over there, then that means we still have a spot for you. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and join us. We will have our first meeting on Tuesday, October 1st at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And we would love to have you. If you have been on the fence about it, if you've been thinking about it, if you have been wondering if it's for you, but you really want to have that additional support, you really want to have the ability to use fertility awareness to successfully transition from the hormones and feel really good about that decision, to feel confident in being able to communicate to your partner intelligently about what this all means. And if you really just want to get right to the point and speed up your learning curve, then this is the program for you. So again, fertilityfriday.com/group program. I'm excited to have you in there. And I just want to thank you for spending some time with us today, for listening to the show, for supporting the show. For more reality series episodes, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/reality. I should really count the number of episodes that I have because I don't know the exact number, but there are many, many fertility awareness reality series episodes for you to listen to. And so these are my on-air calls with my real clients, and they give you a really specific insight into the real challenges that you're facing when you come off the pill, when you're transitioning to fertility awareness, the real questions that women have when they're learning the method and when they're figuring this all out. And so for those of you especially who are kind of like, is this for me? Can I do it? Could I really do this? Could I really successfully use fertility awareness? That's why I love doing these episodes, because if she can do it, you can do it. And really and truly, all we all need is a bit of support and information so that we can really do it confidently and do it effectively. So thank you again for tuning in. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.